this. So incident command and project management. I'm going to let you guys quiz me on my experiences, perhaps, of this, either in the field or in project management.
So I think you're coming from it from a perspective. First of all, it's incredibly to see obviously the detail around that. But I think you're coming from it from a perspective where you already have that hat. You've got 13 years of experience of being in the fire service. You've got a wealth of experience in that respect. What are some of the key challenges that can happen if we try and align this to project management? How does the project manager, which I guess in this instance you would call the incident commander, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
What do they do when things go wrong? What do they do? Like, do they rely on training? What are the processes? And the reason I ask this is one of the things that really excites me about project management is novelty and complexity. If I, as a project professional, come across something I haven't seen before, that really kind of perks my ears. I think, okay, this is fantastic. How do I resolve that situation? What does an incident commander do?
Do you know what? It's exactly the same. It's funny you bring that up. So with an incident commander and with the way we built national guidance for incident commanders it's about having a toolbox of skills. It's about having a toolbox and not following prescriptive patterns each time. There is not a single commander out there on a fire truck right now who will go to an incident and go, I'm going up the doors. This is exactly what I'm going to do at this incident. I might have been to it 5, 6, 200 times before. I might have been to a house fire, but not every single one is going to be the same. So the way we equip our incident commanders is with a toolbox of skills. So you'd say to them, you build in those training elements and say, you need to be able to deal with situations that might arise around this or this and this. And these are some of the things we suggest you do with that. And as a project manager, you do have those skills. We do have these toolboxes of skills and you go through it. And I'm always a big proponent of taking all the bits you learn from different techniques and different methodologies of project management. I mean, yes, I was trained in Prince 2, but I steal bits from Agile all the time and try to put them in, user stories and all these other little pieces of, and funnily enough, we're just starting to do some discovery work based around the Agile methodology on some of our projects. It's really important. And it's about absorbing these tools and then having the understanding about when's the right and appropriate way to deploy them based on the challenges you're faced. On top of that, you've just got to bear in mind, whether you're an incident commander or whether you're a project manager, the governance that goes over the top of that and that you don't break that. So you can adapt, you can be flexible, but you need to maintain some level of governance across all of that. It can't just be you freewheeling and going off piste entirely. There does need to be some checks and balances to make sure that the decisions that you've made are appropriate and that the organization is supporting that. So as long as those institutions behind you are flexible and accepting of these, and I've not found somebody who isn't at this point, if I'm honest, as long as you've provided a solution. I find that in any walk of life, to be fair, it's a life skill. If you go to somebody with a problem, they're not going to treat you or receive you as well as if you go to them with a problem and some solutions. If you go to them with solutions, they tend to be much more open to your suggestions. So yeah, for me, it's this toolbox approach for an incident commander or a project manager.
So this is really interesting. So how have you seen things change over the last decade in terms of what the incident commander or the project manager might and might not do in terms of both leadership and strategy? And an example that I like to use is when we think back to the 1970s in terms of cockpit resource management, so CRM. So in aeroplanes, back in the 70s, the captain was the endpoint. He or she was the leader of that particular plane. Whatever decision the captain made, it was never debated. It's like, fine, the captain is the most experienced individual within the aircraft. They are the person who's piloting the plane. They'll be in charge of the decisions to whatever they decide is going to go forth. And actually, what that led to is a number of crashes because of human error. And unfortunately, which in today's in today's thinking would have been avoidable losses for sure. So there was a dramatic change in terms of CRM, cockpit resource management, where it was a much more kind of collaborative approach, and the captain wasn't the person who could make autonomous decisions without any sort of debate. And so it was much more kind of a flat hierarchy where it was, is this, you know, you were in a position where you could be able to debate with the captain and actually ask and throw in some suggestions. Now I'm trying to think in terms of the fire service. If we are in a state of crisis, because really you're dealing with people's lives. If, as the example that you showed us, if there's been a traffic incident or a collision of some sort and it's quite grave, and my priority is to get people out as quickly as possible from the tangled vehicle so that I can obviously save those individuals if there's injuries. Arguably, how do you manage that? Because arguably, as a project manager, as an incident commander, you might say, look, I have the expertise, I know what I'm doing, we need to get to this point. The priority is just saving everybody as quickly as possible. I'm not here to debate things. I don't want to, you know, I don't want to have lots of different opinions thrown at me. I know what I'm doing, you guys just follow my orders. But how have you seen things change over time in terms of how that's been managed in the fire service?
100%, and I think, you know, this does circle back once again to the qualities of a leader, if I'm honest, and I think we've seen that repeatedly in the fire service and in project management. So for the example of the fire service, we as leaders, as incident commanders, you do take advice from everyone around you, because you work as teams, you value everyone's experience, and you understand that not everyone has the same experience as you. Whilst I might have been particularly good at a certain type of incident, I had a lot of experience there, I understand that I haven't experienced everything. And actually, one of the skills of incident command is understanding that you do need to learn to listen to your crews and their suggestions, and then make decisions based on those views, but to be firm and say, actually, I've listened to all the situations, I've listened to all the arguments here about what we should do, you've put some really good suggestions, we are going to do this now. And it's making people feel that they have been listened to, but at the same time that a decision has been made and it needs to be moved and acted upon quickly. And that is a leadership skill. It's engaging people like that. And in project management, it's exactly the same. It's about listening to people and saying, I completely appreciate, you know, you've got views on this project that I haven't had. I don't know these.
Let me just ask, how do you manage that process when you have minutes? So this is the same in the NHS. Yeah. You have minutes to make decision, because it can be life or death style, and it's not something that project managers often come across. But in the NHS, in the fire service, these will be incidents that people come across, and these are decisions that they have to make. And it's not, so how you can't hold a forum when you're looking at a traffic incident and saying, right, we're going to spend the next 25 minutes having a roundtable discussion with all the crew members, and being slightly facetious, of course. And I'm not suggesting it does happen that way, but what I'm trying to do is to be hyperbolic, to show an extreme example of where project management really needs to manage a situation in a crisis setting. So how do you ensure that happens when you have minutes to spare?
If we're talking literally within the fire service, minutes to spare, the way we manage that is almost methodologies of risk management. We manage the situation. So at that point, we all know you turn up to an incident, and there is I'd say it's an unwritten rule, but actually there are some things written down that say within the first 20 minutes of an incident, decisions will be made, and that is considered what we call dynamic risk assessment mode. So that is the point where you are literally turning up, you're getting as much information as you can, but you have split seconds to make a decision that could impact the rest of that incident. So particularly with like a house fire or an RTC, you have got minutes when you first arrive to make some real ground-breaking choices about how the rest of that incident is going to proceed. Now, you do that based off your training, and to be fair, a lot of those first actions are repeatable. So when you turn up, the crew will know that there are certain actions you would want them to carry out straight away to secure some of the more safety critical elements of that incident. There are some things like securing water if it's a fire. You're making sure your truck's got water from a hydrant, getting the hoses out, preparing the breathing apparatus. All of these things are almost autonomous, and people get on with them unless they're instructed to do otherwise. And it's that team dynamic. And if you've got a close-knit team, whether that's in project management or in incident command, in fire service, it's people understanding what their roles are, having experienced things like that before, and being able to make those autonomous decisions to a degree, but understand that things could change and that you need to pivot on what your project manager or on what your incident commander says, based on the information they've been given. So those critical first 20 minutes are made on not snap decisions, but as best informed decisions as they can as quickly as possible. And you're right, we don't hold forums very early on. But as the incident continues, we then move into the analytical risk assessment process after those first 20 minutes, where we have to start writing things down. It's a legal obligation. You have to start writing things down, and that slows the incident down. But by that point, you've increased the resources you've got on it, and you've got more control over the situation. And I personally think that analogy bridges into project management as well. In the initial phase.
That was going to be my next question. So if we think about crisis project management in a really kind of novel and complex setting, and if we think about it, if you are now in the UKRI and you hopefully don't have life and death decisions to make, it's not minute by minute kind of decision. However, what have you learned from those high kind of tension situations that you've said, actually I've been able to transfer that process into what I'm doing at UKRI? The question really is there to try and get us to understand how other project managers might benefit from that, because it's very unusual, hopefully, that project managers come across these minute by minute life and death situations. Indeed. But what can we learn from that in general project management?
So for me, I think the most important skill in that phase is, if you're setting up a new project, or exactly the same as if you're entering into a new incident, it's about managing the information you need straight away and helping communicate that to everybody else. I think that's one of the crucial things you need to do. It's understanding what's important information and what isn't, because there's a real risk early on in getting bogged down in either a bureaucratic process or lots of information, lots of points of view, and not being able to filter that effectively. And what you end up with is a business case that takes months to write, or all these other elements of a project which take a long time to build because you're building it by consensus all the time. Now, the skills we need as a project manager to do that is, say, identifying what the key information is about this project, and identifying the key people who are going to make those decisions as well, making sure that they're engaged from the start and are ready to make those decisions. So when you need quick decisions to be made, they're ready to do so. If you've got to the point where you've built a lot of paperwork and you've gathered all that information, you've taken months and months and months, and then you get to the point where you need a decision to be made and you haven't engaged the board, or you haven't even help build a board at this point, it's too late. You've got another delay there. So the timescales are different, but all of these elements are adding in more delays into your project timeline. Whereas actually, if you can filter at the very early days what the important information is and start to disseminate that to some of the key players, then you can be up and running a lot quicker than if you wait to get all that information, have long roundtable discussions about it.
I think you're right. I think the key takeaway is quick, efficient decision making based on accurate information. I think that's one of the key takeaways from that project managers or project professionals can learn from. How do I make quick, effective decisions based on accurate decision? Vasilis, Fred?
Yeah, I have a very quick question. I think it's a quick one. I think when you start your career in a lot of different fields, you don't necessarily know when to make these changes and when there needs to be some kind of change of plan. Because when you plan a project, you start with your plan and then something happens, but it's not always clear how you should respond and if you should change your plan or not. So could you give us a quick example of a project where something happened? What was that? And it made you understand and realize, oh, we have to change our plan. And how quickly did that happen? Like, did you make the decision in a day, in an hour, in a second, in a few minutes? Did you ask other people? So what is an incident that makes you say, the plan I have is not going to work out. I need to make some changes?
Certainly. Okay, so a particular example then is under the NFCC, I did work on some projects around enhancing the fire services educational ability, basically the training capability. So we looked at blended learning and all of the aspects that could mean for the fire service. And I inherited some of that work. So it was work that previously had been done by other fire services. I inherited it and tried to centralise it. But actually, quite quickly, it became apparent that the foundation pieces that needed to be there hadn't been done. And I find that quite often when taking over a project, funnily enough, and there's no disservice to anybody else. Maybe it's just the way I look at things. But actually, the grounding reasons why things have been done hadn't necessarily been put in place. And it required a complete pivot on where my stakeholders thought we were with this project when we adopted it to where we actually were and what we needed to do to make it a success, or to say that this isn't going to work. And now for me, that's never an option that's off the table. That can't be off the table at any point in a project. You need to be able to feed back the information you're currently getting from the organization and from the stakeholders to say, is this still worth it? So with this one in particular, we were looking at the use of virtual reality, and there's some fire services have done some great independent work on the use of virtual reality training products for fire services, and they've done some brilliant work. Now, we looked at centrally doing this, but there were some real questions, fundamental questions early on, which were raised around, well, what evidence do we have that this actually works? You know, a lot of money's been spent on this already. What do we have the evidence that it works? So we started to look at, well, actually, we need to pivot and we need to change what we're focusing on here. We're not looking at delivery. People thought we were going to be looking at delivery very early on, and it's not. It's about, actually, we need to pivot on this now and say, what is it we need to understand around this? And it was about engaging the stakeholders and getting them on board early on and saying, the plan you thought we had isn't the one we're going to have to go with here. We need to change. And we did, and we did change that. Unfortunately, I did leave the NFCC before that one had reached fruition, so I'm not quite sure where they are with it at the moment. But it was a critical change that needed to be made, and it needed to be made early on, because I think if we'd have gone down the road of investing a lot of money in what had already been done, it wouldn't necessarily have been the right product at the end of the day to fix any problem in the fire service. And without understanding those points along the way, and again, why I think project managers are crucial in any walk of life, in any sort of organization, is you bring that clarity. Why are we doing this? What are we answering within the organization here? And you bring those things. So does that answer your question, or have I completely gone off tangent there?
No, it's a great example. Thank you.
I also have a question, Carl. Very interesting to hear about the white helmet person who takes a step back and basically gives the direction to the rest of the team. And you also mentioned how to manage the narrative from that role. And maybe you have some experience from moving from one organization to the other. Now, when you went into UKRI, if it was easy to know, you mentioned that the project manager should quickly know who to bring into a project, who to ask for specific information, and so on. Was that a relatively easy process for you to transfer that? I mean, was that easy for you to adapt into a new organization, to know who to ask quickly, and from going from an organization where you've been into a very long time into a new organization?
I have to say it's a great example and a great question. And to give you some context into this, I joined UKRI at the very beginning of the first lockdown. So I haven't physically been in the office since I started this role. I have met everybody via Zoom, bar a handful of people. And I will say the exact thing you're saying there, Frederick, about understanding who the right people are, getting to know them, how the organization works, is one of the hardest things you have to do in transitioning from one organization to another, let alone having to do it completely without those human interactions you'd normally get from an office. But it's one of those things you just have to work on. And I have worked hard over the past year to do exactly what you're saying there, because it's what makes you effective. You have to have the confidence to reach out. The first few weeks I was there, all I was doing was ringing around people on Zoom saying, hello, you don't know me. Who are you? And it was having those cups of coffees, and I still put them in on a regular basis. Either it's somebody I haven't met yet, and I think I might might come into contact with in my everyday work, somebody I think is interesting within the organization, or somebody who I've met but I think I need to know a bit more about what they do and how they work. I put in these coffee and catch-ups, just half-an-hour sessions all the time to build that understanding that you're talking about there, Frederick. It's not easy. It's really not easy, and you have to do it. You have to have the confidence to just pick up the phone to people, or meet them face-to-face when we can, and say, hello, who are you? What do you do? Yeah, and it's building that rapport as well. People know to come to you then as well. It's not just a one-way street. People know who you are and they come to you. I've only been here for a year in UKRI, and God forbid they watch this and say otherwise, but I've had people come to me and ask me questions around risk and around the use of project data, because it's become established fairly quickly that they're things that I'm interested in and I know a fair bit about. I've had people ask me about the fire service and my, skills that have transitioned. It's exactly that. It's a two-way street. But you're right. That's a very difficult thing, and it's something you have to force yourself to do when you transition organisation. But 100% worthwhile, because not only do you know all these different people, you've met massively interesting people as well. The amount of different people and interesting people who I would never have met in the fire service has been brilliant.
Thank you for that. Yeah, very interesting answer. Cheers.